They say you should never meet your heroes, because they'll never be as great as you imagined. But for one man, that saying would turn out to be completely wrong. This is the story of how The Rock, yes, Dwayne Johnson himself, showed up, uninvited but very welcome, at a stranger's wedding. And it all started with a joke that was never meant to go anywhere. For as long as anyone could remember, Ethan had been obsessed with Dwayne Johnson. Not in a creepy way, in a way that changed his life. He grew up small, quiet, insecure, always the one picked last. But somewhere around 13, he saw an interview where The Rock talked about discipline, hard work, and never letting fear decide your future. That one clip flipped a switch in him. From that day, Ethan trained like a man possessed. He hit the gym before school, memorized The Rock's quotes, and even started saying focus, grind, repeat, like a mantra. His friends began calling him Little Rock, half as a joke, half because he really earned it. Over the years, he became stronger, more confident, the kind of guy who inspired others the same way his hero once inspired him. When he got engaged to Sophie, his fiancée always teased him about it. "You're gonna invite The Rock to the wedding, right?" she'd say, rolling her eyes. Ethan would laugh every time. "Yeah, sure. I'll just text him real quick." But a week before the wedding, Ethan's friends had a wild idea. During his bachelor party, they recorded a short video, funny, heartfelt, and a little ridiculous, inviting Dwayne Johnson to come to the wedding. They posted it online with the caption, "At The Rock, our boy's getting married. He's followed your words his whole life. You showing up would make it legendary." At first, it was just a running joke. They tagged him for fun, expecting nothing. But within hours, the post started blowing up, likes, retweets, comments, and thousands of people tagging The Rock. By the next morning, the video had millions of views. And one comment stood out, sitting quietly at the top of them all. "At The Rock, tell Ethan to save me a seat." Nobody knew if it was real. Nobody thought it would actually happen. But what nobody realized was that Dwayne Johnson meant exactly what he wrote. The next few days were chaos. The post kept spreading faster than any of them expected. News outlets, meme pages, and even fitness accounts were reposting it. The Rock gets invited to random guy's wedding. Will he show up? Ethan's phone didn't stop buzzing. His coworkers joked that he'd better get a red carpet ready, and even his mom called to ask, "Honey, are you actually expecting that man from the movies?" At first, Ethan laughed it off. "Of course not," he said. "It's just a fun thing that blew up online." But deep down, there was this tiny spark of hope he couldn't shake. Every time he checked his notifications, a small part of him wanted to see another comment, a reply, a wink, something. But after 2 days of silence, the internet moved on. New trends took over, and the story disappeared just as fast as it had appeared. Ethan's friends teased him mercilessly. "Guess he's busy saving the world again," one joked. "Maybe he's the ring bearer," said another. Even Sophie, his fiancée, laughed as she straightened his tie the night before the ceremony. "You know, babe, if The Rock shows up, I'm marrying him instead." Ethan grinned, but his eyes betrayed a small flicker of disappointment. "Fair enough," he said. The morning of the wedding came. The venue was small but beautiful, a garden surrounded by white lights, music softly playing in the background, laughter echoing everywhere. It was everything they had dreamed of. And yet, as the guests began to fill their seats, Ethan couldn't help glancing toward the entrance every few minutes. His best man noticed. "Dude, you're not seriously still thinking about that post, are you?" Ethan chuckled. No, of course not." But then, after a pause, he added quietly, "Still, we saved him a seat." Sure enough, near the front row, there it was, a single empty chair, slightly apart from the rest. On the seat was a printed sign that read, "Reserved for The Rock." People laughed when they saw it. Some guests took pictures, others asked if it was part of the decorations. But Ethan didn't care. It wasn't a joke to him. It was a symbol of the dream that had pushed him all these years. As the ceremony began, he tried to focus on Sophie, on the vows, on the music. But every so often, his eyes would drift back to that empty chair. It stayed empty through the ceremony, through the kiss, through the applause. And yet, for some reason, Ethan still couldn't bring himself to remove the sign. Because something in him, that same part that made him believe in impossible goals his whole life, whispered that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over yet. The ceremony had ended hours ago, and the garden had transformed into a glowing celebration. Strings of lights hung between the trees, glasses clinked, music pulsed softly in the background. Ethan and Sophie danced, laughed, and embraced every moment. It was perfect. The kind of night you never forget, even without a single miracle attached to it. By the time dinner rolled around, the reserve for the rock chair had become a running joke. Guests kept sitting in it for photos, pretending to flex or raise their eyebrows like Dwayne Johnson. Even Sophie's uncle struck a pose and shouted, "Can you smell what the rock is cooking?" sending everyone into laughter. Ethan laughed too, maybe louder than everyone else, but somewhere deep inside, he still felt that sting. That little kid in him who had once believed anything was possible was whispering, "Not tonight, huh?" As the evening went on, speeches began. Friends told embarrassing stories. Sophie's maid of honor cried halfway through her toast. Ethan's best man grabbed the mic, teasing, "Let's raise a glass to the man who waited years for the rock to show up and still ended up with a rock on his finger instead." Everyone laughed and clapped, and Ethan took it like a champ, raising his glass with a grin. But as he looked around at the tables, the warm light, the people he loved most, and that one empty chair still sitting untouched near the front, he felt something shift inside him. He realized it didn't matter. Dwayne Johnson didn't have to come. He didn't need his hero to show up to validate the man he'd become. He'd built this life himself, through every early morning workout, every broken moment, every ounce of discipline. The rock had inspired him, but Ethan had done the work. He leaned in towards Sophie and whispered, "You know what? I think that's okay. He doesn't need to be here. I've got everything I ever wanted." Sophie smiled and kissed his cheek. "That's my little rock." The DJ switched songs, upbeat, joyful, the kind that fills a room with light. The crowd cheered as Ethan and Sophie took the dance floor again. The laughter was loud, the air filled with warmth and music. Then the DJ's mic crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice trembling slightly, "before we start the next song, we have a special guest tonight." The music cut. The crowd quieted instantly. Sophie frowned. "Wait, did we plan something?" Ethan shook his head. "No, not that I know of." A low murmur spread through the guests. The DJ's hands were shaking as he continued. I was told to just play this song, and, well, you'll see." He hit a button. A familiar bass line echoed through the speakers. Deep, slow, powerful. The kind of sound that could only belong to one man. Heads turned toward the entrance. Phones lifted. And in that moment, as the crowd began to gasp and whisper, Ethan's heart stopped cold. Because standing there, framed by the soft golden lights of the garden, was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson himself. For a second, nobody moved. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, it all stopped. The only sound left was the bass line rumbling softly through the speakers, the song unmistakable. It was "You're Welcome" from Moana, Dwayne Johnson's own voice booming over the speakers, filling the night with surreal irony. At the entrance, under the golden fairy lights, stood a man in a black tailored suit, towering, confident, calm, that unmistakable grin on his face. There was no mistaking him. Not a look-alike. Not a prank. It was him. For a few long seconds, everyone just stared, frozen in disbelief. Then the crowd exploded. Gasps, screams, phones flying into the air. Some people were shouting his name. Others were just standing there with their hands over their mouths. The DJ nearly fell backward from his booth. The bridesmaids started crying. Ethan stood completely still, his mind blank, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Sophie turned to him, her face pale. "Ethan, that's not real. That can't be real." But it was. The rock started walking toward them, slow and easy, every step deliberate, that signature raised eyebrow cutting through the chaos. His presence filled the entire garden like gravity itself had shifted toward him. The security team wasn't there. No entourage, no cameras, just him. When he reached the crowd, people instinctively stepped aside, clearing a path straight to Ethan and Sophie. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. He stopped a few feet away, looked directly at Ethan, the same man who had grown up idolizing him, quoting him, living by his words, and smiled. "So," he said, voice calm but booming enough to carry over the stunned silence. "Heard someone save me a seat." The guests burst into laughter and applause. Ethan was speechless, his eyes wide, tears threatening to spill. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked, "You actually came." The Rock laughed, that deep, rolling laugh that somehow made the entire situation even more unreal. "Man, you invited me. You thought I'd ignore something like that?" Ethan just shook his head, completely overwhelmed. "It was just a joke. We didn't think you'd even see it." The Rock clapped him on the shoulder, almost knocking him off balance. "Well, I saw it. And when I read that caption, I thought, this dude followed my words his whole life. The least I can do is show up when he says I do." The guests erupted again, cheering, shouting, recording every second. Sophie was crying. Ethan was shaking, and Dwayne Johnson, one of the biggest stars on earth, stood in the middle of it all like he belonged there. Then he looked at the bride, grinned, and said, "Now, I gotta ask, am I too late for the cake?" The whole place broke into laughter. The Rock had arrived, not as a celebrity, not as a guest of honor, but as part of their story, and nobody would ever forget it. After the chaos settled, it still didn't feel real. Guests were whispering, laughing nervously, wiping away tears, and trying to process what had just happened. Even the DJ looked like he'd seen a ghost. The Rock had actually come, not for a press event, not for a sponsorship, but for one random fan's wedding. Ethan's legs were trembling as The Rock walked up beside him. Cameras flashed, but Dwayne didn't seem to care. He wrapped his arm around Ethan's shoulders, a move so natural it almost looked rehearsed, and said, "You did it, brother. You built your life. That's the real championship right there." People clapped, some cheered, others just stared. Sophie was still in disbelief. I don't understand. How? Why are you here?" The Rock smiled. "You know, I get a million tags a week. Most of them are nonsense. But this one, your invite, it felt different. I watched that video. I saw the way your friends talked about you, the respect in their voices. And I thought, man, if this guy has lived his life trying to be better because of my words, then the least I can do is show up and remind him he's been the hero all along." Ethan blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. The words hit harder than he expected. All those years of looking up to his hero, and now that hero was standing right here, turning the spotlight back on him. They led The Rock to a table near the center, the one with the "Reserved for The Rock" sign still taped to the chair. When he saw it, he laughed, deep and genuine. "You actually kept it? Damn, that's commitment." Ethan grinned through his tears. "You inspired it. Couldn't just take it down." He sat down. Yes, The Rock sat down, and the whole wedding erupted into a kind of joyous chaos. People lined up to shake his hand. Waiters nervously offered him champagne. The DJ played "Can't Stop the Feeling." And for the first time in the night, the massive movie star looked like the most relaxed person in the room. He didn't talk about movies or fame or success. He talked about normal things, gym playlists, food, relationships. He asked Sophie how long they'd been together, teased Ethan about his dancing, and even clinked glasses with the best man. At one point, Ethan leaned closer and asked, "Be honest, was this planned? Like, is this some PR thing?" The Rock chuckled and shook his head. "Nah, brother. I told my team not to tell anyone. Sometimes you gotta remind people that being human's the best flex there is." The way he said it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't staged. It was just real, raw and grounded, exactly like the man everyone had admired for years. The crowd around him didn't see The Rock. They saw Dwayne Johnson, the man who meant every word he said. And for Ethan, sitting next to his childhood hero, it felt like everything in his life had just come full circle. After a while, the laughter and the shock blended into a strange calm. The wedding had settled into something almost peaceful, though nobody could stop sneaking glances at the massive figure in the center of the room. The Rock. At their wedding, Ethan had already lost count of how many times he'd heard the words, "This can't be real." Even Sophie, who was glowing with joy, kept looking at Dwayne like she might wake up any second and the whole thing would vanish. Then, suddenly, the DJ's mic gave a soft crackle again. Mr. Johnson." But The Rock raised a hand with that easy confidence that could quiet a stadium. "Just Dwayne, brother. Just Dwayne." He stood up, towering over everyone, his black suit fitting perfectly, his presence so powerful the room went completely silent. Even the air seemed to pause. He looked around at the tables, at the faces full of disbelief, awe, and pure happiness. and then down at Ethan and Sophie, sitting side by side, hands clasped tightly. He smiled. You know, I've given a lot of speeches in my life, he began, voice deep and steady. Championships, premieres, award shows. And people always expect something big, something powerful, something larger than life. He paused, glancing around. But the truth is, the most powerful moments are never the big ones. They're the quiet ones. The ones like this, surrounded by people who love you, who've seen you at your worst, and still stand beside you anyway. The crowd listened like he was reading scripture. I saw Ethan's story online. He continued, his tone softening. I saw a man who spent years chasing strength, not for fame, not for likes, but to become better. And I thought, that's the real definition of a hero. Not someone on a screen, not someone lifting trophies. It's someone who wakes up every day and keeps going, for themselves, for the people they love, and for moments like this one. Sophie was already crying quietly. Ethan's jaw trembled, his chest tight. I came here tonight because I wanted to remind him, and all of you, that heroes don't live on movie sets or in stadiums. They live right here, he said, tapping his chest. And sometimes, they wear a suit instead of a cape, or hold a hand instead of a weapon. But they're real. And if you ever forget that, look around this room. He lifted his glass, someone had silently refilled it, and smiled wider. To Ethan and Sophie. To real love, real strength, and the power of never letting go of who you are, even when life gets crazy. Cheers. The crowd erupted. Applause, whistles, tears, laughter, the kind of chaos that happens when something touches everyone in the room at once. People stood, raised their glasses, shouted his name. Ethan was crying openly now, but he didn't care. He stood, clinked his glass against Dwayne's, and said softly, "You were my hero growing up." The Rock grinned. "And now, brother, you're mine." For a few long seconds, the two men just looked at each other. No cameras, no fame, no audience, just mutual respect. And somewhere in the background, the DJ whispered into his mic, voice trembling. This might be the greatest wedding speech of all time. The applause from his speech still echoed through the hall long after The Rock sat down again. People were clapping, cheering, some even whistling. The energy in the room was unreal, but different now. It wasn't the chaos of excitement anymore. It was something deeper, a shared feeling, like everyone had just witnessed something that meant more than a celebrity appearance. Dwayne lifted his glass one more time, nodded to the DJ, and leaned toward Ethan with a smirk. "All right, brother," he said, "enough crying. You ready to dance? Or are you going to keep pretending you're allergic to rhythm?" The entire table burst out laughing. Sophie covered her face, shaking her head. "He can't dance to save his life," she said. The Rock grinned wide. "Then tonight's the night we fix that." He stood up and motioned to the DJ, who scrambled to cue something upbeat. Within seconds, the speakers blasted Uptown Funk. The crowd cheered again as The Rock stepped into the center of the dance floor, clapping his hands and pulling Ethan with him. At first, Ethan resisted, shy, blushing, waving his hands in protest. But you can't say no to The Rock. Especially not when he's pointing at you in front of 100 people yelling your name. "Come on, little Rock," someone shouted from the crowd. And just like that, Ethan started moving, awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence. The guests circled around, laughing, cheering, clapping to the beat. The Rock matched every move, exaggerating his steps, making people laugh so hard they could barely breathe. Sophie joined in, then the bridesmaids, then the groomsmen, until the whole dance floor was a wild, joyful mess of people dancing alongside one of the biggest stars in the world. But what stood out most wasn't his fame. It was how genuinely normal he was. He wasn't performing. He wasn't posing for cameras. He was just there, laughing, sweating, joking, living the moment. At one point, a little boy, maybe 8 years old, wandered up shyly, tugging at The Rock's jacket. The music was loud, but Dwayne noticed immediately. He crouched down, smiled, and asked, "You want to dance, champ?" The boy nodded, wide-eyed. The Rock lifted him easily, set him on his shoulders, and started dancing again while the kid threw his arms up and screamed in delight. The whole room melted. Parents were crying. Even the DJ was laughing too hard to keep the beat. When the song ended, The Rock gently set the boy down and clapped along with everyone else. Then he turned to Ethan, still catching his breath, and said, "You see, brother? Life's better when you stop worrying about the cameras and start dancing for real." Ethan could only nod, smiling through his exhaustion. And for that one perfect moment, the fame disappeared. The lights, the expectations, the larger-than-life persona, all gone. There was no The Rock anymore. Just Dwayne Johnson, a man who decided to crash a stranger's wedding and remind everyone what joy actually looks like. After the laughter and the dancing, everyone slowly began to return to their seats, flushed faces, sore feet, glasses half empty. The Rock stood at the edge of the dance floor, looking around with that quiet, thoughtful smile that seemed to carry both power and peace. Ethan walked over, still catching his breath, his shirt slightly untucked, his cheeks red from smiling so hard. "Man," he said, laughing, "you just turned my wedding into a movie." The Rock chuckled. "Nah, brother. You did that the second you put your heart into it." They stood there for a moment, side by side, watching the crowd, Sophie chatting with her friends, parents taking photos, the little boy from before showing off a dance move to his mom. The Rock took a deep breath and said, "You know, I didn't just come here to crash your party. I came with something for you both." Ethan frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Dwayne reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black box. But instead of opening it, he handed it to Sophie. "This isn't from me," he said softly. "It's from life. From hard work. From believing in something when no one else did." Sophie opened the box. Inside was a key. Simple, metallic, but engraved with 3 words, "Keep moving forward." Ethan blinked. "What's this?" The Rock smiled. "That's the key to your new gym. A friend of mine in Nashville owns the place. It's yours for a year, fully covered. You said fitness changed your life, right? So now you get to share that with others. Train people. Inspire them the way you've been inspired." Ethan's mouth fell open. "You're kidding." He shook his head. "Not a joke. You've been building yourself your whole life, man. Now it's time to help others build themselves too." Sophie covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh my God, Dwayne, that's unbelievable." The Rock shrugged. "It's just a start. What matters most is what you do with it. Remember, strength isn't measured by how much you lift, it's by how much you give." The room was silent. You could hear the faint hum of the lights, the clink of a glass somewhere in the back, but no one said a word. Everyone just watched as Ethan stood there, holding the key, completely overwhelmed. Finally, he managed to speak. "I don't even know what to say." Dwayne grinned. "Say thank you to yourself. You earned it." He gave Ethan a quick hug, firm, genuine, the kind of hug that said, "I mean this." Then he stepped back, looking him dead in the eyes. "One more thing, brother. Someday, when someone looks up to you the way you looked up to me, don't just tell them your story. Show up for theirs." The crowd burst into applause again. People were crying, some recording, others just frozen, trying to take in the moment. And Ethan, once the shy kid who dreamed of meeting his hero, now stood there, holding a key that meant something much bigger than a gym. It was proof that dreams, when built on heart and discipline, had a way of circling back. The night went on, but something had changed. The music was still playing, people were still laughing, yet there was this strange, warm calm in the air, like everyone knew they had just lived through something that would be told for years. After his toast and the gift, The Rock didn't rush to leave. He stayed, talked to Ethan's parents, took photos with guests, even helped an old man carry a chair. There were no cameras from his team, no publicists whispering in his ear, no one asking for just one last shot. He was just there. Someone brought him a slice of wedding cake, and he actually sat on the edge of the dance floor, fork in hand, talking with a small group of guests as if he'd known them forever. He laughed, told stories from his early wrestling days, about the time he was broke and living out of his car, and everyone around him listened like kids around a campfire. Ethan and Sophie stood nearby, watching it all unfold in disbelief. "Do you think anyone's gonna believe this happened?" Sophie whispered. Ethan smiled softly. "I don't care if they don't. I know it did." He looked around the room, at his friends, his family, and the man who had once been a face on a poster in his teenage bedroom. Now that same man was eating cake next to his uncle and laughing about the weather. But as the night drew to a close, Dwayne quietly stood up and stretched. The energy in the room shifted. People noticed, but no one wanted to stop him. They just watched, silently grateful. He found Ethan and Sophie near the entrance. "All right, my friends," he said, voice low and kind. "It's your night. I've already stolen enough of it." Ethan shook his head. "You made it unforgettable." The Rock chuckled. "You already did that before I showed up." He reached out his massive hand and clasped Ethan's shoulder. "Take care of her. Take care of yourself. And remember, your story doesn't end here. It's just the start of a new chapter." Then he hugged Sophie, whispered something that made her smile through tears, and gave one last wave to the crowd. "Thank you for letting me crash the best wedding I've ever been to," he said with a grin. And with that, he walked out into the night. No lights, no fanfare, no press waiting outside. Just a man heading to his car under a quiet sky, leaving behind a story that would live far longer than any headline. Inside, nobody spoke for a moment. The music played softly again, and the guests just sat there, stunned, smiling through tears. Ethan finally whispered, "He really just left." Sophie nodded. "He didn't come for attention. He came for us." Ethan smiled faintly. "And somehow, that means even more." He looked down at the key in his hand, the small, simple key engraved with the words "Keep moving forward," and he realized something. Heroes weren't people who lived on screens. They were people who showed up when it mattered. And sometimes, they didn't even need to say goodbye. By the next morning, the story had already started spreading. At first, it was just a few posts from guests, shaky phone videos, blurry photos, emotional captions like, "The Rock actually came to my friend's wedding." But by noon, the internet had caught fire. Clips of Dwayne Johnson giving his speech, dancing with the crowd, lifting a kid onto his shoulders. They were everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, news sites, all flooded with the same headline in different words. "Dwayne The Rock Johnson crashes a fan's wedding and leaves everyone in tears." Millions of people watched, commented, shared. Some thought it was staged, others argued it was too genuine to be fake. Every frame, every smile, every word from his toast was dissected, analyzed, and celebrated. But the strangest part? Dwayne Johnson said absolutely nothing. No tweet, no post, no interview. Just silence. For a man with hundreds of millions of followers, that silence was louder than any statement could have been. It made the story even more powerful. It wasn't for clout. It wasn't for headlines. It was just real. Meanwhile, Ethan's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, influencers, even local TV stations wanted interviews. But he kept saying no. He didn't want to turn it into something fake. When one journalist asked him, "What did he say when the cameras stopped rolling?" Ethan just smiled and said, "He told me to keep moving forward. That's all I need to remember." The video of that quote alone hit 10 million views in a day. Soon, fan art started popping up. Someone painted a scene of The Rock standing in the garden, handing Ethan the key. Another created an edit that ended with his words echoing, "Strength isn't about how much you lift. It's about how much you give." And through it all, Dwayne stayed quiet. Until 3 days later. He finally posted one photo. No caption, no tag, no explanation. Just an image, a small black key lying on a wooden table, engraved with the words "Keep moving forward." That post got 20 million likes in 12 hours. People flooded the comments with messages like "Real hero energy," and "This is why The Rock is different." But for Ethan and Sophie, the best part wasn't the viral fame. It was the quiet that came after. Sitting together at home, they watched the world talk about what had happened, and yet, somehow, it still didn't feel like something that belonged to the internet. It belonged to them. Sophie rested her head on his shoulder. "You know what's crazy?" she said softly. "He didn't come to make a statement. He came to make a memory." Ethan smiled faintly, his eyes on the glowing screen. "Yeah," he said, "and he gave us one that'll never fade." Outside, the world was still talking. But in their small living room, everything was perfectly still. Months passed. The headlines faded, the posts disappeared under new trends, and the world moved on, as it always does. But for Ethan and Sophie, life never quite went back to normal. The small gym that The Rock had gifted them, the one with the key that said "Keep moving forward," was finally ready. It wasn't fancy, not huge or high-tech, but it was theirs. The sign outside read, "The Forward Gym." Simple, honest, real. On opening day, Ethan stood at the door in his worn-out sneakers, heart pounding just like it had on his wedding day. Sophie was beside him, holding a small framed photo, the moment The Rock had handed him the key. A few people from the town came by, friends, family, even strangers who'd seen the story online and wanted to visit. One man walked in shyly, holding his phone. "You're the guy, right? From the video? The one with The Rock?" Ethan smiled. "Yeah, that's me." The man looked down. "I just wanted to say, that story pulled me out of a really bad place. I started going to the gym again because of it. So thank you." Ethan froze for a second, then shook his hand firmly. "No, man. Thank you. That's exactly what this place is for." Throughout the day, people kept coming, not for fame, not for selfies, but for something much simpler: motivation, hope, connection. Ethan helped them lift weights, taught a few basics, gave advice. He wasn't trying to be anyone's hero. He was just living what The Rock had told him that night: show up for someone else's story. That evening, after they closed, Sophie found an envelope slipped under the front door. No stamp, no return address, just his name, Ethan, written in thick black marker. Inside was a short note, handwritten in bold, block letters. "Brother, you kept your promise. You moved forward. That's what life's about. See you down the road. D." There was no signature, but Ethan didn't need one. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the paper, feeling that same rush of disbelief and gratitude that had filled him the night The Rock walked into his wedding. Sophie wrapped her arms around him. "He really meant it," she whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, he always does." He took the note, folded it carefully, and pinned it next to the photo of the key on the gym's wall. Then he switched off the lights, leaving the words glowing faintly in the dim reflection of the street lamp outside. Keep moving forward. And somewhere, miles away, maybe on a movie set, maybe in a gym, maybe halfway across the world, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson smiled quietly, knowing one small act of kindness had built something that would outlast any blockbuster. Because sometimes, the greatest thing you can do with your fame isn't to be seen. It's to show up.